I'm Paul Higgins, an ex-corporate executive turned business owner who for 5 years struggled to grow a cloud consulting business whilst battling a chronic disease. With the help of mentors and experts, I got the business model right, built a sales and marketing engine, and developed a high-performing team that ended in a successful exit. I received a kidney transplant from a mate, and now on my second life, I dedicate my time to helping other cloud consultants scale quickly with less effort to enjoy life. Detecting an accent? I'm an Aussie working globally from Melbourne, Australia. I interview successful cloud consultants sharing their scaling stories to give you inspiration and practical tips. I have dedicated experts for cloud consultants on the show to save you time and money by working with the right people. If you want to scale quickly with less effort to enjoy life, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Paul Higgins, and welcome to the Cloud Consultants Show, episode number 477. Today's topic is Recession Readiness for digital consulting agencies. And it's not just for digital consulting agencies, it's for all consulting services businesses. And you're going to learn three key things. One is contingency plans, and there's a great way that our guest Ryan goes through it. The second is what metrics to follow, and he doesn't overwhelm you. He talks about the top two, and you really need to follow those. And the third thing is cash preservations. We all know cash is king or queen, but what do we do to preserve it? And he's got some brilliant ways of doing that. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. And if you love what you hear, please subscribe. It's for cloud consultants, so anyone that consults and deploys a SaaS platform, you're in the right space. If you're a regular, thanks a lot for listening. And why don't you reach out and let me know that you listen, because otherwise I don't know. So Paul at paulhigginsmentoring.com, say hi, and also mention some topics you'd love me to cover. You can get a full transcript by going to paulhigginsmentoring.com/podcast, episode 477. And you can also get a summary on the notes that you're listening to now. So if you're driving, riding, whatever you're doing, this will all be there for you. Before we go in the interview with Ryan, I'd like to thank our sponsors. The first is the Cloud Consultants Collective, the world's only revenue-focused collective for cloud consultants. It's basically your peers answering your hardest business questions faster than you'll find on Google or YouTube. Don't believe me? Why don't you try it for yourself? Just go to the cloudconsultantscollective.com to join for free today. The next is Workflow Academy. Are your top performers feeling overwhelmed by their workload? Do you worry about their performance will suffer, and at worst, they will leave the company? We have an innovative solution that can help you. We partner with Workflow Academy to provide you with highly trained junior talent who can support your top performers to ensure that the team stays on track and you keep your most important team. You can learn more about this game-changing solution at paulhigginsmentoring.com/WFA today. Let us help you support your top talent and achieve your business goals. Our guest today is Ryan. He's an experienced operations and finance leader for creative agencies and funded startups. As a partner of Upsourced, he helps scaling agencies build better plans, see the future, and drive profits. Prior to Upsourced, Ryan led operations and finance for a large influencer marketing agency called Ahology, where he built the team to 50 people and to 10 million in annual AGI. And they ended up selling it to Quote Technology in July 2018. Perfect timing to sell, Ryan. So what we're going to do now is hand it over to Ryan Watson from upsourcedaccounting.com. Great to have you here, Ryan.
Great to be here. Excited. Let's do it.
Yeah. So, we had a really good conversation. It's not often that you have someone that has both, the compliance of accounting and then the advisory all in one firm. And it's not often that people look after agencies. Sure. So, it was like an absolute sweet spot to get you on, because even though, if you're watching or listening to us today and you're not an agency, effectively you're a service business, right? So if you're a cloud consultant, you're a HubSpot agency, it's all one and the same, right?
Problems are all the same.
Correct. So why don't we kick off with who your ideal client is and what problems you love to solve for them?
Yeah, that sounds good. This might go in reverse order, but ultimately, again, it's important to say you would call us an accounting firm, right? But ultimately, it's a bit of a misnomer. I think mostly what we're doing is CFO and advisory services, right? We're building operations, accounting operations in order for us to generate the kind of data, financial and non-financial data we can use to make decisions with our clients. And then we're sitting side by side with our clients and we're using that data to make decisions, to see the future and make interpretations, right? So as you mentioned, we work with creative agency, service-based businesses somewhere in the 1 million to 10 million in revenue range. And, ultimately, they're going to come to us because they're hitting an inflection point. They have a particular problem. But very simply, we like to help our clients see the future and drive profit.
Yeah. Brilliant. And what are some of the problems that they come to you with?
Yeah, and I'll take what could be a very long answer and I'll try to condense it into a somewhat short answer. But what I would say is it depends based on their life cycle. So we see agencies across a life cycle, right? And so let's talk about a couple of the sort of more common ones. So we have names for them. We call agencies in that like $1 million to $3 million range. We call that build mode. You have a business, but now you're trying to refine it. And I would say we find you somewhere in the spectrum of what we would call the hierarchy of financial needs. So what I would say is your problem is you have put this agency on your back. You've put it together with shoestring and bubble gum. You've willed it to this thing that should exist in the world, but it might have warts all over it. Like client concentration risk. It's not profitable. Like I own my job, not a business, all these sorts of things. So they could be very varied, but you probably have a problem with either solvency, like you might not be able to make payroll, or project profit or gross profit that, you're not earning on a gross profit basis. Cash reserves would be the third. The fourth being like just operating profit. Do the owners make any money? Or the fourth being you're not generating repeatable revenue. You don't have a predictable growth. So you've got one of those 5 problems if you are in that range. And we see that. The other bucket of problems, so the other major inflection point we'll see agencies is who've eclipsed that. They've got a business that's working at that 3 to 4 million. And at that point, things start to break. Like it was working and now it's not working. And you have some staff morale challenges and you might lose a client or two. And that's because you've kind of gotten to the point where like you as the owners or partners are no longer able to just kind of bear hug the agency and sort of be involved in all the decisions, right? You're several layers removed. Yeah. And so now you have to empower and incentivize the next level of deputies in your organization to be able to make those decisions on your behalf. And that is a painful process to go through. And we help you do that both through good like reporting tools as well as incentive structures. And so anyways, those are probably the 2 most common like archetypes and problems that accompany those archetypes.
Yeah. And I'm assuming on the second one it's around, when do we hire? Like, and that balancing that cash flow of, when you bring on the people versus when you bring on the work.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, again, that is like a universal struggle with every agency. The thing is like, again, as you said, like these are all service-based businesses and all businesses have like the thing that's hard, right? So if you're, a widget seller, the thing that's very hard is like managing your inventory and managing the cash flow that comes with the inventory. If you're like a logistics, it's the operations of the sort of node to node. That's very difficult. In a service-based business, it's like managing the human capital. It's managing capacity management and utilization, right? It's very tricky because if you have utilization is all about how busy are your people. And if your utilization rate is quite high, well, that's profitable, but it's also very restrictive. If it's too high, you're unable to sell new work and adapt to it quickly. But if your utilization rate is too low, as in you've got too many people with too much free time, sure, you can react to new deals, but you're not going to make any money. And so it is a very fine line, particularly in a tight labor market, like most of our clients are in, to be able to sort of thread that needle. And that's the challenge, right? So when should I hire? How should I think about this? That's the tricky thing. And there's, the solution to that, of course, is manyfold. But I agree with you. That is one of the main challenges that second persona of agency really struggles with.
Yeah, great. And we'll definitely loop back to that in our discussions. But, let's call the elephant in the room. Like the economy is not going as well as we'd like, no matter where you are and where you're listening to in this world, right? I'm in Melbourne, Australia, but most of my clients are in North America. And if you look at, Australia, Canada, the US, very similar models, right? We've got high inflation, we've got prices skyrocketing, and it's just, tough environments. And look, there's some sectors that are doing really well and there's some sectors that aren't, right? And and I know that, that R word's being used quite a bit that, are we in a recession, technical or not? Ultimately, things aren't great. And I know that you sort of got some, well, the reason that we brought you on, other than you're a fantastic guy, and I think,
well, those are all the primary reasons.
You could get some help from Ryan is, what do you do in these tough times, right? As people say, it's always easy to run a business in good times. It's much harder in tough times. So,
totally. And this is, by the way, this is particularly hard because the last 2 years were like so much easier. I mean, again, especially in the US specifically, as there were, several government sponsored programs with free money, right? Running a business with like 6 figures of free money is a lot easier than the alternative. Yes. And now we're kind of in a phase where you said, like, it's some industries are maybe facing headwinds to a greater degree than others, but there is one commonality, which is like, there's not a business in the world right now that at a minimum isn't going through their P&L and evaluating every single source of spend and asking themselves, like, am I getting what I expect to be getting? Is this worth it? Is there an ROI here? And that's at a minimum creating some difficult conversations that we all, you and me too, Paul, like we're not immune from that. We're all living it. So so obviously we're having these conversations with our client. We're with regard to just, hey, whether you're feeling it or you're not feeling it, let's get ready, right? Let's get prepared. And we've got a guide and ultimately, like, what we did is we put together this little questionnaire of like 30 questions that are basically like a risk assessment. So let me answer these questions and see, am I at a greater than average risk in the event of a recession? And if so, what can I do about it? And the guide is really meant to address each risk kind of sequentially and say, all right, if this is a risk for you, here's some ideas. But what I would say is there's like a few themes. And the other thing I'll also say about this is you're going to read it and it should all sound familiar because it's good, solid, evergreen advice, right? None of the things that you should do in a recession are not things that you shouldn't do. It's just now at this time, it's more important than ever to follow some of these like common sense things. And
and just before you go through them, Ryan, like listen to Ryan Watson, episode 477 of the Cloud Consultant Show. If you're listening and you're thinking, how do I get this guide? It's in the show notes, right? So we'll have a link in the show notes. It's called Creative Agency Survival Guide. So it's in the show notes, so you'll get it. So if you're walking, you're riding, you're driving, don't worry about it, right? We've got it.
We'll get it to you. Yeah, it's right there. Okay, awesome. Yeah. So anyhow, relatively comprehensive guide, a few like major themes. One of the themes is, and this permeates the whole thing, of course, which is like the preciousness of cash, right? So there's a handful of things that we talk about with regard to cash. One thing we talk about is, to the extent that you're able, prioritizing an adequate amount of cash reserves, right? And so in our case, we advocate for 3 months of operating expenses in cash reserves, particularly heading into headwinds like this. Now, look, that's kind of a rule of thumb. You might be a business that has a higher degree of uncertainty than normal, and other factors that might suggest you should hang on to a little bit more than that. And certainly other businesses that have recurring revenue streams and, maybe less. But
just quickly on that, I think you're dead right. The one that I always add a little bit to is your average tax bill, right? Because we here in Australia, we've got a thing called BAS, which is like VAT that you have to pay every quarter, right? And there's nothing worse when you've just got over your payroll. Next minute, you get your tax one. So I normally put a tax buffer on top of your operating expenses. You're
totally right. So certainly having adequate cash reserves. We also advocate for having a line of credit. If you don't already have an operating line of credit, it's a thing that we advise all of our clients to get. For what it's worth, we don't advise getting debt and funding an unprofitable business with your debt. That's not what we're suggesting. It's a rainy day. It's only really meant to smooth out the peaks and valleys of cash flow endemic to project-based work, right? That's the purpose of the line of credit. And then, of course, some other common sense things around cash, which is specific to, let's make sure that we are also going through and being very thoughtful about what we're spending money on. And what we really want is flexibility, right? So if we're coming up on any long range or large contractual obligations to spend money, let's consider, are there alternatives to that kind of agreement, which would be shorter in duration, more flexible, or maybe, abstaining from that expense altogether. So a lot of discussion around cash specifically. Another piece is really just, and this is more of an operational motion, which is you're going to want to get closer to your clients, especially if you have risk factors like concentration risk, where you're going to want better information faster about how their business is doing so you can be prepared to react in the event they're facing headwinds that are going to trickle down to your budget. Other factors like whether you've got, you're bringing discretionary dollars from that client or necessary dollars. So if you have a discretionary budget with a high concentration risk, that's, two risk factors stacked on itself. And so again, getting very, very close to that client. And then the third, and this is maybe the most important tangible piece of advice, and this is the thing that we are working on with our clients, which is a contingency plan, right? And so again, many of our clients have not yet felt the effects of the headwinds, but what we're advising is, whether you have or haven't, we're going to build a plan, and we're going to build a very specific plan that says, in the event A occurs, here's what we are going to do about it. And here's what we're going to do about it is a very specific set of actions. So for instance, like if, we lose our largest client, that's a bit of a risk, we are going to cut $20,000 of monthly expense. Not specific enough. What I want is, here's the individuals or roles that we are no longer able to carry in the event we lose our largest customer, right? These are, because the biggest thing about the contingency planning is these decisions are really hard. They're emotionally charged. They're the last thing we want to do as business owners. And you don't want to make those decisions when you're on tilt, like when you're actually in the throe of having that like really gut-wrenching stress of, oh my gosh, that actually happened. That is the last time that you want to try to make some of the most important decisions. So right now, when you have a clear head and things are not crazy, write down what you know in your gut to be true, print it out, put it in the desk drawer, file it away, hope you never pull it back out. But if that event occurs, then the goal is just read it. Don't think about it. Don't react emotionally to it. Your clearer former self decided that these are the steps you should take, so take them. That is what we're advising folks to do. And I think if nothing else, that provides a great deal of sleep at night factor.
Yeah. And do you, how it plays out, do you see, the top of the salary people, they're often the people that go, or is it the bottom end, or you see any pattern as to who people normally let go?
Well, that's a great question. There is some degree of bang for your buck factor with regard to higher salary folks, but I think it ends up being just, I think the devil is in the details, right? And again, this is why having a really thoughtful contingency planning conversation is so important. Because again, I can think of one particular client where we're doing this, and that example of our largest client leaving is a real example from that particular scenario, right? So there's a little bit of concentration risk there. There are definite headwinds in that business. And so we've identified that is a scenario that we want to war game out. But in that very specific scenario, we have lost revenue that we no longer need to service, or we no longer are in a position to service, right? And so in that particular scenario, the individual, the role-based component of that looks a lot more like the kinds of people performing the kinds of services that client was buying and now is not buying. Does that make sense? Yeah, so it's not generically related to just like, I'm looking for dollars. I'm looking for very specific dollars in that case. So it'll just depend. But sure, like, you should be very thoughtful about, like a $12 an hour person who spends 5 hours a week with you is, maybe that's not a critical, but ultimately you're picking up pennies in front of a steamroller at that point. So I'd look elsewhere.
Yeah. And look, I had a client recently that, came on, knew we always look through their P&L. Like I did accountancy at university, never practiced as an accountant, but when I was at Coca-Cola, we were all treated as accountants, right? We had to know our numbers. Yeah. I used to do $1 billion acquisitions, and so I know my numbers pretty well. And I said, you've got at least 50% of your developers' costs of revenue, right? That is just crazy. Yeah. Like, so all of a sudden that led into the conversations of performance and whatever. I'm like, well, and sadly, no one ever wants to let go of your people. Like, they're like family. It's very different to working in a company where it's a little bit reserved. This is like really hard, but he had to make a hard decision because he cannot continue to run his business with 50% of his revenue in development costs. So
yeah, and it's crazy how it's not crazy. It's not at all crazy. It makes all the sense in the world why that's such a common problem, but it is such a common problem, and there's so many reasons for it. And I think the thing that's really tricky, recession aside, is we see this a lot, which is salary load is one of the we try to go very simple with metrics. So salary load, forget about what they're doing, just like salaries divided by revenue. Where are we? Yeah. And there's rules of thumb, somewhere 45, 50% of the agencies, probably the max you'd want to see there. And we see 80s plus, sometimes greater than 100, which is appalling. But there's always, it's not as if in those cases it's we've been derelict, we're asleep at the wheel. It's usually more a case of optimism, right? It's yes, I know. I know that, but two things. One, I need these people in order to exist. Right. Like if I let go of my only developer, I no longer can provide development services. What am I supposed to do? Right. And it's OK. I'm going to grow myself into that. And I get that. Like, I completely get that. I think the thing that's tricky is it's just entrepreneurs are optimistic by DNA. We have to be. You have to. You can't do it. You can't do it as a pessimist. You wouldn't. So you have to be optimistic, and you have to create systems to rein in your optimism. So in those cases, what we try to do is sit down and say, totally with you. I think selling into this team is the perfect plan. But why don't we do this? Let's create a stage gate for ourselves. Let's say, like, we're here. We want to get here. I think you can do it. You think you can do it. Let's do it. But also let's check in. Like, who knows? There's also things outside of our control. So if in 3 months, we're not, we think the trajectory looks like whatever it is. So we're not going to be all the way there, but we'll be a quarter of the way there. But if we're not a quarter of the way there, let's admit to ourselves right now that we're not going to be able to sell into it like we did. So if we don't hit this stage, then we are going to have to pull this lever. Do we agree right now? And so that at least reins in the optimism. I'm on your side. I don't think we're going to have to do this. You don't think you're going to have to do this, but let's at least agree in the very unlikely case, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And, but it's tough. I mean, it's just the DNA of entrepreneurs. And that's what I love about it.
Yeah, correct. And like some of you listening here probably haven't been in the workforce as long as you and I, Ryan. I know our hair gives away a few secrets if you're watching us on YouTube, but
it does.
It's some of us have been through these cycles and some haven't. But you're right. Like, I always say to people, to owners that, okay, we're going to grow the business, so let's have target revenues when we're going to bring on roles, right? Because you can't do everything. Like you said, it's that sort of, moving it across into your team, which is the second phase we spoke about. You're talking about the flip side, which I think is also very pertinent in a time when that there's risk associated with the economy. And like you said, it's often not things that you do. It's what happens to your clients, and then there's a knock-on effect, right? And if your clients happen to be in the wrong segments, or, if you look, sadly, travel, right? I know so many agencies that, were heavily into travel through COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And, no one could predict that. No one could control it, right? So
what are you going to do?
Yeah, I think it's really good. And I think, the worst thing is where you're paying everyone else and not paying yourself, right? And, as an owner, you've probably been in those situations. You might be in that situation now, and it's just not fair on you. But more importantly, it's not fair on your family, right? The reason that we run these businesses is to support our family. And we're basically cheating our families, and that's not something anyone wants to do. So, look, great discussion around contingencies. How you sort of talked about, one of the metrics was around, salary load, total salaries divided by revenue. But what other information do we need to make the right decisions at the right time?
Well, again, I'll make this relatively. I'll try to get this brief, but we have. So I have a point of view on metrics, which is like, you can read all sorts of articles. It's like, here's 20 financial metrics for digital agencies or HubSpot agencies or whatever it is, and I would look at those and say, yep, I agree. Those are 20 KPIs. Should you look at all of them right now? The answer is almost definitely not. Right? I firmly believe in simplicity, and I think for any given agency, there's probably just like one or two that you should be focused on, and just forget about the other stuff right now. Because I'm a big believer in building momentum. And so I look at financial metrics in a hierarchy of needs, right? Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We start at the bottom and we work our way to the top, and we do not skip steps. So we cannot worry about self-actualization if we do not have shelter. And so that hierarchy of needs is, again, like we look at solvency. Can I make payroll? And there are metrics around the solvency, generally like cash divided by, current liabilities or my monthly burn. So if I'm not solvent, then I'm not going to worry about profit. Of course, I'm not profitable. I don't need to continue to remind myself I'm not profitable. I just need to make payroll. Yeah. So once I've cleared the solvency hurdle, then I'm looking at project profit, right? Am I earning a gross margin of 50 or more, ideally 55, 60%? If I'm not, forget about everything else. And of course, there's also, so that's where a lot of agencies who come to us in that build mode are stop, they fail. That's where we start to help them. And ultimately, that's either a function of a utilization problem. I've got people that I'm paying to do work that are not doing work, or it's a rate per hour problem. People are utilized, but I'm not earning an adequate rate on them. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, right? So project profit, and we're going to start there and we're going to build momentum there. And then we'll get to the next one, which of course is cash reserves. We like to look at cash reserves as a function of runway. How many months of operating expenses can we clear that or not? And from there, now we can worry about firm profit, right? Because ultimately, if you're not profitable on a gross margin basis, you're not going to be profitable on a firm basis. So forget about it, right? So once we've cleared that hurdle, then yeah, we're going to work on operating profit. We're going to target 20% or better. And then finally, the capstone to this is repeatable revenue generation. Do I have a predictable growth rate that is a function of my growth engine? And there's all sorts of like CAC to LTV and other metrics that we might look at there. So it's very contextual based on where you are. And again, I'm a big believer, especially for agencies that are struggling with one of those. There's nothing more demotivating than continuing to beat yourself in the face every month with like, my profit margin is negative or 2% or whatever it is. Like, I don't need to keep telling you that. That makes you feel bad. Let's just focus on like the one thing. Let's build really small wins. Let's feel good. And then when we clear that, now we can worry about the next thing, right? But it's reversing negative momentum is very hard. And that's the whole game. So anyways, hopefully that answers your question, but yeah,
no, that's great. So around I totally agree with project profitability, right? So have you got some examples of how people have turned that around, like how your clients have turned around that project?
One that comes to mind is actually relatively recent. HubSpot agency actually who came to us. And the classic story, I kind of told the archetype, they fit it perfectly of like, here, we've crossed the 7-figure mark, maybe the year prior. And so like we did it, right? This thing exists. It should exist. We coasted it on fumes, but we made it. And now we're trying to build what is a sustainable, profitable business. And the business wasn't profitable. And so, we asked, we went through the hierarchy of needs and we did not have a solvency problem, but we did have a project profit problem, right? And so then we asked this owner, we asked her, okay, so like, let's look at some of your individual process. Like which ones are making money, which ones aren't, right? And she's like, oh, this is easy. Here's my top 5 projects. She quoted me like highest revenue. These are our best clients. I'm like, hey, great. But I understand these are strong revenue projects. I'm looking for which ones are the most profitable projects, right? And she didn't have any idea, right? Got a lot of salary per people working across lots of different projects, but couldn't tell you which one was making money and which wasn't. So one key action was like, well, we got to implement some time tracking here. Like we need some data to help us answer this particular question, right? Time tracking, key diagnostic in this particular issue. So anyways, we go around, we implement some time tracking, and we do this for a lot of clients, and we helped her do it, and we sold it to the team, and we're very clear about why and the benefit to them and all those sorts of things. And so anyways, we go away, we come back, let's say 6 weeks later, whatever the time frame was, and now we've got some data, like we can look at what's happening, right? And so as I mentioned before, like if you've got a gross margin problem, then you have either a utilization problem or you have a rate per hour problem. In her case, didn't have a utilization problem, right? We had, utilization close to 70% as a firm. We target like 65 to 70%. That's fine. That felt healthy. So it wasn't that. So then we were looking at like, what's the rate per hour of this business? Revenue divided by these billable hours that we're tracking. And that was where the problem was, right? And that was abysmal. And the thing that was surprising to her was when we're quoting these engagements, right? She's quoting these retainer work. It looks, we quote what we think is going to be profitable. We have some expectation of how much work it's going to be and think we're going to make money. But of course, scope is being blown all over the place, right? And classic story, we all see it. Scope's all over the place, and we just don't have a feedback loop for us to identify, we went over scope. We need to have a conversation with our client. We need to either adjust or raise the rate or whatever it is. And so that like 80% of it was just identifying for this owner that we had the problem. The solutions are varied, but she had some pretty good relationships and was able to, in some cases, rein in scope, in other cases, raise the rate. And now this agency is turning like, I don't know, it's like 52% gross margin. And it's like, great, wonderful. And so, like it's not hard. It's not hard, but it does take looking at the right thing at the right time.
Correct. And I think, we used to talk about, I know it's not it's not a great way of saying it in today's time, but we used to talk about normal time and wartime, right? And like at Coca-Cola, we'd have wartime, which is like you have to make big, hard decisions in these times, right? And if you're in the situation where your cash flow's tight, you're not paying yourself what you should be, you've got to make these tough decisions. And, often we've worked with clients where we've gone and said, like, these projects, you've got to either go and increase the rate or you've got to lose the business, right? Because it is just draining you. And they're not easy decisions, but they're decisions that need to be made. And if I just sort of ask a quick question around this, right? Because people are probably, you're listening to Ryan, you're thinking, God, like my accountant doesn't do any of this, right? Like I need a Ryan in my business, right? You constantly, or you often have clients that leave accountants and come to you, right? But for most of us, it's like the worst thing in the world. Oh my God, I've got to leave my accountant. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. Tell us that it's, like I said, you've been through it lots of times. Yeah. How painful is it really to change accountants?
Hey, look, I mean, it's not painful at all, right? Like I think if nothing, it's, I don't know. It's like a lot of things, right? Like we build it up in our mind and and there's personal relationships. And that's probably the worst part of that. Like, oh my gosh, I've had this person and we have history and there's some loyalty. And, look, in many cases, by the way, like there's a reason that they're talking or considering working with us because they've hit an inflection point and they're looking for things that are different than their accountant is providing. And almost always both sides are feeling the friction. The existing accountant is like, this isn't really what you're asking me to do, things that I don't really prefer to do. And I don't work this way. And now I'm feeling bad and you're feeling bad. And so generally when they have the conversation, everybody is like, oh, okay, this is way easier than it is. And then in terms of like actually getting up and going, it's just project management 101, right? Like, so we have a really regimented process where we can pull you through a course of 45 days. And I'm not going to go into our whole process, but the short of it is you build it up in your mind more than it is, more than it becomes.
Yeah, spot on. Look, I just recently changed accountants. It's the same thing, right? And, and the other thing is your accountant's got lots of clients if they're running a good business as well, right? So they're not only relying upon you. So if you're not getting what you want, please go and make a change. And also a fresh set of eyes over, and especially if you're getting someone that's an industry expert, it makes a massive difference versus having someone that's a generalist that you might have not even been in the industry when you first started. You're no longer in that industry, right? But you've kept the accountant. I think specialization is really important. So we're here talking to Ryan Watson, 477 from upsourcedaccounting.com. So we've talked about recession readiness, right? So we've talked about contingency plans. We've talked about what information and what metrics you should cover. So, we've talked about cash a lot, right? And, it is the lifeblown. Well, they say cash is king or cash is queen. What are some tips you've got around preservation of some cash?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, again, I think there's basically two sides to this coin. One side is I have cash, I need to keep it. The other side of the coin is I need to get as much of it as I can, right? So with regard to I have cash, let me keep it. Again, I think some of the things I said earlier are still valid, which is we want to go through like some general hygiene, which is like, let's go through the P&L and let's look at the kinds of things we're paying on. If we can negotiate for more flexible, because again, I think one of the themes for what we're doing right now is just flexibility. Like, so it's not just a cost cutting exercise. It's a flexibility increasing exercise, right? So if I'm finding myself in these like long contractually obligated agreements, I'm looking for ways to add the ability to cancel in 10 days or 15 days notice, right? So that's where I'm looking. I think with regard to, I also mentioned like having some backstops, like a line of credit, or even like, if you have personal wealth, or if you've got folks around the table that have some personal wealth, like lining up some of those conversations, again, just as backstops. I think those are really important. I think there's several things that you can do on the sort of like cash collection side. I think, for instance, I ran an agency before sitting in my seat here as partner at Upsourced. And when I started, our cash collection cycle was like 120 days or something like that. We worked with large enterprises. It was just kind of one of those things we assumed like, it's just what it is. What are we going to do about it? Yeah. And I'll tell you, we went from like 120 days to like 47 days in the first 6 months. And most of it was just like having conversations and a little bit of negotiation. So you'd be surprised at like how little you would need to offer in the way of incentives to expedite your cash collections on existing invoices or to change your invoicing schedules to move them up. Sometimes it's just asking. And other times the trick here is it's all about psychology. So it's not like I need to pay you a market rate for you to do this thing for me. It's really just like create the psychology that on their side, they're like, oh, I'm really going to pay more just for this thing I don't care about. Fine. Okay, here you go. And so you would be surprised at how much success you can have incentivizing early collections. Like, we worked with I won't say their name, but one of the largest CPGs in the world. And their stated was 120 days of payment, and they paid us in 15. Yeah. And so anyways, this can be done. Yes. And that's where I would focus now.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And the other one, which, I often tell my clients is that I'm like, how do you spread your payments out there? It might be, 50, 20, 10 or, whatever it is, right? And I'm like, are you doing it on time or are you doing it on project completion? And they're like, always say completion. I'm like, no, do it on time, right? Because your end client is always going to have issues in their business where they, not you, but they have caused the fact that the project isn't on time, right? So do not do it based on completion. Do it on time. And that can make a massive difference. And like you said, change the variables too. Like some people are like, they're only 20% up front. It's like, well, why not be 50? So there is ways within your control to get more cash in these tougher times. And I think that's brilliant. And also I think the renegotiation is a great point, right? Like, all of your suppliers, just go and renegotiate. Go through your top suppliers from your P&L, who are you spending money on the most, and then go and look at renegotiating terms. You probably haven't done it for a long time. It's like when I worked for Coca-Cola, like we didn't just hand out discounts every year, right? But if someone came and asked for one and it was justified, we'd normally say yes. And it's like a bank, right? If you call your bank up, 9 out of 10 times you're going to get a better rate. Or if you call your mobile or cell carrier or whatever, you're going to get better rates if you say you're going to leave, but you just haven't done it, right? So they work on the squeaky wheel, right, is the principle.
Totally. And they're all feeling the same thing you are. They're all worried about losing you too. So they are much more open to negotiating with you than they might have been 2 years ago. So ask.
Yeah. Look, we've had some brilliant conversations around the recession readiness. There's contingency planning, there's the information we've covered and the key metrics, and then also cash preservations. Now, there'll be a full transcript in the show notes so you can get it. There'll also be a link. So there'll be a link to the Creative Agency Survival Guide. So that's on the website now. So it'll be in the link, but it's on the website as well, which is upsourcedaccounting.com. But what we're going to do now is go into the rapid fire. So, Ryan, I'm going to ask you 4 questions and you're going to give me some rapid responses. Ready for that?
Quick, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Great. So the first one is, what are some daily habits you do to help you scale your business?
So I recently adopted the GTD method, the getting things done. And I used to be this person who would just like wake up every day and think, what should I do today? Oh, I guess I'll do that. And I'm embarrassed to say that out loud, but I have like taken control of my life and I am more organized and more productive than I've ever been. And that has, I don't know, it's been life changing. So I use a tool called Things to organize. Yep. It's been awesome.
Yep, brilliant. Next is, where do you find out more information about how to scale your business?
Yeah, I mean, just others. Like I guess you might call it, it's a community. Maybe some people call it a mastermind or whatever. I just look to people who have done it before. Like, I'm not reinventing the wheel. There's a playbook out there. And so I find smart people who are further than me.
Yep, great. And if you go look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that. Do not reinvent the wheel, right? We've got your back. We've already made the decisions.
Yep.
The third one is, if we could grant you one wish, right? One wish for upsourcedaccounting.com. What would it be?
This might sound like a silly wish, but I wish that everybody who currently works for us would continue to work with us forever. Like I always say, like I want this to be a place that all these people retire, and I genuinely want. So if I could wave a magic wand, everybody would. We just have such a phenomenal team. I want everybody to stay here forever.
Brilliant. And the last one is, what do you know now with running this practice that you wish you had known earlier?
Yeah, I think that I would say it's that success or failure, especially in a service business, is like 98% perseverance and like 2% everything else.
Yeah. Totally agree. And thankfully, I've been blessed with a lot of tenacity, so that always helps in life. So look, brilliant having you on, Ryan. I'll do the outro in a moment where I can, talk more about where you can find Ryan, etc. But look, great points around recession proof. And look, it's there, right? Whether you want to address it or not, you're going to get some tightness in your profit and loss. You're going to get some tightness in your balance sheet. Be prepared, like have those contingency plans in place. So Ryan's been brilliant having you on today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
What a great interview with Ryan and some really practical tips, right? And you don't have to do it alone. I think that's the main thing. And if you're not getting the help that you really need out of your accountant at the moment, well, I think, go and have a chat to Ryan. He's a great guy, as you saw or heard on the podcast. And believe me, he backs that up when you talk to him one-on-one. So also, if you've learned something really valuable, why not share it on LinkedIn? So just take a screenshot of the podcast and share it, and mention Ryan. He would love that. And also, why don't you share it with some peers, right? Some people that that need some help. They might be in trouble. Cash might be tight for them and need some really good tips. Why don't you share this with them? They'll think you're an absolute rock star. Check out our solo shows. If you're scaling your cloud consulting business and want to know a blueprint for success that's a proven track record that you can follow, just go to paulhigginsmentoring.com/blueprint to get your free copy today. And as always, please take action to scale quickly with less effort to enjoy life more.
Learning is just one piece of the puzzle. It is now time for action. Head to today's show page at paulhigginsmentoring.com/podcast. Get the links and put it into action. Head to your favorite podcast platform, subscribe, rate, and review the show. Suggest topics for me to cover at paul@paulhigginsmentoring.com. And don't wait one more minute to gain access to content, especially for you, a cloud consultant, at paulhigginsmentoring.com/newsletter. This could be the difference between wasting time figuring it out yourself or scaling quickly with less effort to enjoy life.